First up, though, delighted to welcome to the studio Paul Nuttall, UKIP Leader. First interview of the new year with you today with us here at Talk Radio. And congratulations. I haven't seen you since you won the leadership.
Thank you very much. I think I came in a couple of days before, didn't I? But I haven't been in since. Thanks.
No, well, the Christmas, New Year, people have had things to do. There's been various things going on, not least Donald Trump. I've got to ask you, first of all, about events across the Atlantic in terms of Donald Trump. Now, your former leader, Nigel Farage, very supportive of Donald Trump. Can't keep away, really. Do you think that he's made a mistake? Now, so many things are emerging about the president-elect.
No, I think in the long run, I think Trump will be good for Britain. He was pro-Brexit. One of the first things he's going to do is he's going to put the bust of Winston Churchill back in the Oval Office.
Oh, come on, that's a sort of nonsense thing that means nothing.
But he's an Anglophile, and the most important thing is that he's made it clear that we will be at the front of the queue when it comes to any trade deal. And what Britain's going to have to do once it's out the EU is sign free trade deals all over the world. And it's good because it can be done quickly, because we're negotiating now, or will be, as a free independent state and not a bloc of 28. And America, the average time it takes for America to crack a free trade deal is 18 months. We can do this, and we can do it quickly.
It's about 9-10 years for the EU, isn't it?
Well, it just goes on and on and on, whether that's TTIP, whether it's the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. It's like a never-ending story, and that's because there's so many interests. There's 28 or 27 member states now, and everyone wants to get their own little thing out of it, and that's why it can never work.
So for you, this is, no matter what, all the question marks about Donald Trump, it's good news.
I think it's good news for Britain. I also think it will be probably good news for the rest of the world in the long run as well, because he has said that he wants to target the real threat to our world in the 21st century, which is Islamic fundamentalism. And he said that he's going to go after ISIS, which is music to my ears.
OK. Talking about the various different threats to Britain. One of the things that was obviously such a big debate during the run up to the referendum last June was about this supposed threat of Brexit and how bad it was going to be, and the terrible economic stakes. Now, we've seen some pretty big U-turns from various people since that case, not least from Mark Carney, the Bank of England governor. We were talking about it on the show earlier, where he's pretty much said that, Brexit is more of a risk to the EU than it is to us, and it's certainly not the biggest risk to our economy. Are you delighted now to see people eating their words, or do you think that we've still got an issue where an awful lot of people in the establishment, elite, I suppose, as UKIPers like to call them, still don't agree with the aims of Brexit?
Well, they don't agree with the aims of Brexit, and we're talking about people like Nick Clegg and Tony Blair, Peter Mandelson, Ken Clarke, who are wedded to the idea of the European Union. Let's not forget these were people who would have had us in the euro if they would have had their own way, and what a disaster that would have been. And it is great now to see people like Mark Carney eating their words. Let's not forget what him and George Osborne were saying before the referendum, that our economy would fall off a cliff if we had Brexit. Well, what's happened since? We're the fastest growing economy in the G7. Manufacturing is up, unemployment is down, our economy is booming, and it will only get better, I believe, once we're fully outside the European Union and we can begin to function as a free, democratic, independent state once again.
Now, big question marks about the rate of our departure, and some people even about whether we depart or not. Do you trust Theresa May when she talks about whether a hard Brexit, a soft Brexit, a red, white and blue Brexit, or Brexit means breakfast, or whatever it is she said lately? Yeah. Do you trust that Theresa May is going to lead us out of the European Union?
I'm not 100% sure. The one thing that we know about Theresa May is that she's always been very good at talking the talk, but never been very good at walking the walk. Look at her record as Home Secretary, particularly when it comes to immigration, when she signed up to the idea that we get it down to the tens of thousands. Well, in her final year of being Home Secretary, a city the size of Newcastle upon Tyne came to this country net. So she hasn't walked the walk at all. And let's not forget, Theresa May was a Remainer. She wanted to remain part of this European Union. It's very easy for her now to turn around and say, well, the reason why we haven't invoked Article 50 yet is because David Cameron and his team never planned or prepared for Brexit. She was the Home Secretary in that government. She should have been part of this.
She was a senior member of the government, but I suppose you could argue in her defence a reluctant Remainer, but also the fact that she wasn't in charge of getting the civil service to organise for Brexit.
Being a reluctant Remainer is no defence whatsoever. I mean, have some principle here. If she believed Britain should be outside the European Union, she should have been an active leaver. I'm sorry, I'm not sure whether she will take us out, and that's why it's more important now than ever that UKIP continues not just to exist, but to prosper and go up in the polls, because we need to hold their feet to the fire.
Well, indeed, and this is one of the roles of the UKIP, isn't it? Because this is the thing, Brexit. You and I certainly agree that it's good for Britain. We both voted leave, but is it good for UKIP? Now, we discussed this when you were running for the leadership of the party. You were the front runner. You won it, with a big majority. But there are big question marks about what the point of UKIP is anymore.
Well, firstly, you say I won it with a big majority. I won it with the biggest majority that's ever happened in UKIP. I mean, I've now got the biggest mandate in the history of the party to unify and ensure that UKIP goes on and prospers. UKIP is more important than ever before. UKIP can prosper. One, we will hold the government's feet to the fire on Brexit. And when she begins to backslide, and she will backslide, I am sure, and they will try to keep us in the single market in the long run, I genuinely believe they will try to force us into some sort of Norway option, which keeps us in the single market, which means we can't properly control our own borders. UKIP will be there. UKIP will be the voice of patriotic people who voted in their droves on June the 23rd to leave this European Union, and that meant leaving the single market. Equally, we have great opportunities in Labour constituencies right now, because you have a Labour Party leader who is completely out of touch with the grassroots. He talks about things which interest him, things which swirl around the Islington dinner party: climate change, fair trade, Palestine. They don't matter on doorsteps in working class communities. What people are interested in is immigration, law and order, and ensuring that British people are put first and to the front of any queue for jobs. Well,
we'll talk a little bit more about Jeremy Corbyn and Labour's immigration policy. But again, going back to the Tories and Theresa May, you're saying, we'll hold the government's feet to the fire. How? You've barely got any councillors. You've only, yes, you've got a load of MEPs. You've got one MP. I don't know. Are you on speaking terms with Douglas Carswell? Your last leader wasn't.
I am. I was with Douglas Carswell on Monday, and we were chatting through what was going to happen this week in Parliament, and indeed chatting about the Supreme Court and the imminent decision. Look, we've got 500 councillors right across the country at the moment. We might only have one MP, but that's the fault, I believe, of the electoral system, whereby we can get 4 million votes at a general election but only retain one MP. The first past the post system, in my opinion, belongs not just in the last century but probably the one before. But look, our influence goes way above and beyond Parliament. The fact is, without a single MP in 2013, we forced the then British Prime Minister into giving a referendum he didn't want to give. And look, we've been the outriders on issues for the past 10 years. When we were talking about controlling immigration through an Australian points-based system 10 years ago, we were racist. We were xenophobes. When we were talking about slashing foreign aid, of course, we were called heartless. Now, the majority of British people want to see that happen. I've been talking about the need for an English Parliament for many years, and people have said that this is outlandish and it will lead to the breaking up of the Union. Now I find in a poll today that the majority of English people are feeling more English.
Well, this is interesting, actually. Yes, it's a YouGov poll. People are describing themselves as, when asked, are you British, are you English, it's always very normal. People describe themselves as Welsh, people describe themselves as Scottish, and that's a kind of patriotism that's considered approved of. English is always a question mark once you've got an England flag, unless it's a football tournament time. It's always questionable, isn't it? And this is the thing. That's gone up by 5% since 2015 to 19% of people in England describe themselves as English, not British.
What I meant by majority is that if you poll it, the majority of English people now want to see an English Parliament. So not only are people feeling more English than ever before, they want to see real representation for English people. Because at the moment, what we've got as a result of Tony Blair's devolution is Scotland, which has its own parliament, Wales, which has its own assembly, the Northern Irish, who have their own assembly, and England has nothing. It cannot be right, it cannot be fair. And if we want to hold the union together, the union which we all love, which isn't the European Union, it's our union, the UK, which has given us real peace and prosperity for 300 years. The only way we're going to do that is by giving fairness back to England, and that means an English parliament.
That's the next big big campaign for UKIP?
Yes, and I stood on that. I stood on that platform in the leadership election, saying that I believe that England deserves its own parliament, England deserves its own first minister, and England deserves a fair deal. Because at the moment, in terms of finance, it doesn't get a fair deal. And in terms of democracy, it certainly isn't getting that fair deal.
So you talked about being an outrider, UKIP as the party, for all these different policies. Like, so you could add, I suppose, grammar schools into that, return of grammar schools as well. Now sort of mainstream policy for the governing party. And I do accept there's an element of the influence on there being a referendum in the first place, and in terms of the outcome of that referendum. But in terms of forcing the government's hand, the reality is, a city businesswoman who was able to take a case to the High Court and now the Supreme Court, we are expecting perhaps that decision as early as next week from the 11 law lords involved in that Supreme Court decision. That's going to have more influence than realistically UKIP's going to have.
Well, if the Supreme Court hold up the High Court decision, then it will go back to the...
As many expect it will do.
Let's be honest, many of us do expect. It will go back to the House of Commons, a bill will go through the Commons, and then let's see what the House of Lords do, because if they try to amend that bill out of sight, it really could well be the death knell of the House of Lords, I genuinely believe. But look,
would you welcome that?
I think I would, actually. I'm not sure whether an unelected chamber has any place in the 21st century. But if the House of Lords try to negate Brexit, and if they try to amend this bill out of sight, then we really could be going back 107 years and we could have an election on the basis of the peers versus the people. And I'm sure that the people will win once again. But look, the Miller case, I think, is fundamentally wrong. There is an effort here by the establishment to keep us in the single market. You have people like Nick Clegg saying, and indeed Chuck Ramuna, saying that the British people didn't know what they really voted for on June the 23rd.
We're all a bit stupid.
We're all a bit stupid. We voted to leave the EU, but people didn't really understand that meant leaving the single market. I want to make something clear now. If we stay in this single market, we will not be able to control our own borders. We will not be able to sign our own free trade deals across the globe. We will still pay a membership fee, and indeed we will have to comply with EU regulations and directives. That is not being outside the European Union. That's like being like Norway, which is in essence is a fax democracy because it has to comply with these regulations and directives and has no real say. So that isn't what we voted for on June the 23rd. We voted for clean Brexit, out the single market.
Okay, Paul, we're going to be talking about what threat you can play against Labour under Jeremy Corbyn and other aspects besides, of course, the next big challenge, the May local elections. It's 12:18. We'll get an update on the travel and we'll be back here in the Talk Radio studio with Paul Nuttall, UKIP's leader. That's all coming up next. We're still in the studio with Paul Nuttall, the UKIP leader, talking about the challenges ahead this year for the UKIP party. Paul, let's talk about, we were talking about the Supreme Court decision, which was expected possibly as early as next week, the case brought by Gina Miller, forcing a parliamentary vote. And you talked about you expected to go through the Commons, whether or not it went through the Lords, whether we'd have to end up having an election to abolish, the House of Lords. But let's go back to the Commons vote, because a number of MPs, including the likes of Owen Smith, who stood for the Labour leadership in the last year, and Tim Farron, the Lib Dem leader, have said quite categorically they will vote against any vote to trigger Article 50. What would UKIP do then? You've only got one MP, you don't get much say in the Houses of Parliament, but what would your reaction be to that?
Well, I think it would be a disgrace because they're trying to undo or unpick the will of the people, and it was clear what the people voted for on June the 23rd. They voted to come out of the European Union, and there's a couple of ways of doing this. Of course, you can repeal the 1972 European Communities Act, or indeed you can trigger Article 50, and if they try to undo the will of the people, then of course UKIP will go after these people. We will campaign hard in their constituencies. But I think one thing...
So you will deliberately target any MP who votes against the triggering of Article 50?
Absolutely. Absolutely 100%. We will go into their constituencies and we will campaign hard, and we will campaign hard to remove them as MPs at the next general election, whether that be in 2020 or sooner.
Okie dokie. Well, we know election's coming sooner than any general election, even if there is an early election caused by Theresa May. The May local elections. This is your next big electoral challenge. Now, we could see the case where people think, UKIP are effectively providing the opposition in a way that Labour Party isn't under Jeremy Corbyn and do very well, or you could completely disappear from view because you're in irrelevance now. Which way do you think it's going to go?
Well, firstly, it mightn't be the first, actually, Julia, because there might be a Copeland by-election before.
Yeah.
But we don't know when that's going to be. That could well be on the same day as these county council elections. There's a good number of seats up. I think we're defending around 200 county council seats. It's not going to be easy for us, I don't think, because we won these seats in 2013 when David Cameron when David Cameron's was not popular at all. He'd taken politics onto our ground in terms of the referendum in the European Union, and UKIP got a massive boost from that. I think Theresa May is going through a bit of a honeymoon period at the moment. I know the wheels will come off. I'm absolutely certain they will come off the Conservative Party and Theresa May. Whether they've come off by May or whether it will be later, I'm just not sure.
So we shall wait and see when it comes to the May vote.
I'm not going to overpromise and underperform. I'd like to underpromise and overperform. I think we will win.
Wait a minute, you're setting a low bar so you can say it was a success, even if you do really badly.
It depends what you mean by badly. I think we will win seats, but I'm not going to deny it won't be easy.
Okay. Well, talking of winning seats, though, of course, the biggest challenge really for you guys ahead in terms of long-term actually winning seats in Parliament are going to be those northern seats that have got Labour MPs at the current time, but they voted by huge percentages to vote for leaving the EU. We know now from the polling that, such as we trust polling, always have to say that proviso now, that people now identify more with their Brexit vote than they do with any party political allegiance these days. Now, after Jeremy Corbyn's relaunch didn't go quite as well perhaps as some had hoped or planned regarding immigration and free movement, he seemed to U-turn on his own U-turn on his own U-turn. I'm still none the wiser after numerous interviews he gave and a speech where he stands on it, other than the fact that Labour Party doesn't really seem to think that we should limit immigration. Is that for you the number one thing where you can damage Labour?
Well, I wouldn't just say northern seats, because there's working class communities up and down the country. I mean, for example, there's working class communities in Bristol and Bootle, where I'm from, different ends of the country. But look, Jeremy Corbyn's relaunch was an absolute disaster. Even by his second interview, he'd gone completely off piste and has started talking about his hobby horses once again. And the killer line which he used was when he said that he doesn't believe immigration is too high at this present moment in time. Well, I tell you what, you go into any working class community and they will tell you straight, it's out of control. Do you think that is that the killer? That's the killer fact for you to take on Labour MPs. It's one of the killer facts. The one thing that we know, and this just hasn't come from UKIP, it's come from the Bank of England and trade unionist movements as well, that uncontrolled, unvetted immigration drives down wages in working class communities and puts some people out of work. That is wrong. And it's wrong that we have an oversupply of labour. It's wrong that a city the size of Newcastle comes here every single year when we've got 1.7 million of our own people who are unemployed, and 600,000 of them are between 18 and 24. It can't be right. But the reality is, 1.7 million unemployed in a country this big is what economists effectively call full employment. Well, look, it's not a bad figure, but it's still 1.7 million people. And I would like to see our own people put back into work first before we bring people in to come in and so-called do the jobs that British people don't want to do. But we all know an awful lot of businesses, employers who will say that's one of the problems. They can't get British people to do those jobs. They can't get them to be the fruit pickers. They can't get them to do the back-breaking work. Do you know, I hate it when people say that, because as far as I'm aware, before 2004, before we opened the floodgates to the whole of Eastern Europe, the fruit was still being picked in the fields in Norfolk and East Anglia. The coffees were still being served, and pints of beer were still being served in pubs and coffee shops. British people, young people will do these jobs, but they shouldn't be browbeaten in a way that they're being browbeaten by the establishment. Well, we're talking about people on low pay there. What about high pay? Jeremy Corbyn's big relaunch ended up being a long conversation about a wage cap. People talking about maybe a wage cap of £1 million. No one being allowed to be paid more than a certain factor of the lowest pay in their company. Where do you stand on a wage cap? Because a lot of your working class voters would probably feel quite resentful about the fat cap pay. Do you know what? It's easy, isn't it, to play the politics of envy? It really is. But the reality is something different. Corbyn was talking, I think, primarily about the City of London. And if you want our brightest and our best to go and work in Hong Kong or Tokyo or New York, then you go down the idea of a wage cap. We'll lose our brightest and our best. And let's not forget, it's easy to put the boot into financial services, but it accounts for around 12.5% of our economy and over 20% of the total tax receipts of this country. So I don't want to lose our brightest and our best, and I don't want to return to the 1970s.
You've got no issue with people earning big bucks.
Well, look, it's the same with football, isn't it? I've got a season ticket at Liverpool, and if we went down the line of a wage cap, then the best players would go and play probably in China now because they're paying the best wages, or they'll go and play in Spain or Italy or Germany. No, I want the best to stay in this country, and I want the best people employed in the financial services sector.
Talking of the best staying in this country, leads me finally to our last question. Nigel Farage, former leader, I think he was leader 4 times. I lose track of all the resignations, but is there a problem for you as the leader of UKIP that you are still being overshadowed by Nigel Farage?
No, I don't think so.
Wouldn't you rather he went off to America on a lecture tour and did a bit of Fox News and left you to the job here?
Do you know what? Some people have said that to me. I don't. I want Nigel to remain front of house. I want him to still go on the big programmes and represent UKIP. I think he has unique things to say. I think he's popular out there in the country, particularly in the areas where we're targeting. So no, Nigel isn't posing a problem for me in any way, shape or form.
And all of that nasty infighting that was going on that dominated UKIP politics, is that all over and done with?
Do you know, I have to admit, when I came into this job, I said that UKIP at this present moment in time, that was back in November, represented the jigsaw which had been tipped on the floor. I spent my first month, not on the airwaves, not on television. I was out there sorting out these problems, putting the party back together again. And it's worked. Everyone in UKIP now has a smile on their face again. We're up in the polls by 2%. Membership is rising for the first time in 18 months. We finished second in a by-election in Sleaford. So I've had a really good, positive start.
Okie doke. Well, we'll see if that continues. Paul Nuttall, UKIP leader, thank you very much for joining us here at Talk Radio.